Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Flashback Comics here in Woodbridge, Virginia. I am your host, Troy David Phillips, and today I am going to continue my installment on the ages of comics in comic history. Now, we open up into what experts informally call the Copper Age of comics. Now, at this point, it's approximately 1986, and now we launch into a time of, one, Marvel introducing a lot more titles, not as regular titles, but as limited series. There is an explosion of 4-issue, 5-issue, 6-issue limited series, spotlighting characters that otherwise might not sustain their own titles, but giving them a chance to break out and see if they will actually catch on. The X-Men were definitely leaders here. The X-Men had risen in popularity, becoming one of Marvel's two most popular books. And characters from the X-Men like Illyana Rasputin, Colossus's younger sister, characters like Iceman, characters like the Beast and Dazzler, starring in a series together, Beauty and the Beast. This change and this format of limited series was not exclusive to Marvel. DC had a great many of their own. There was a 4-issue Trevor Von Eden series for the Green Arrow that was a high point amongst the limited series. And certainly the end of Crisis on Infinite Earths brought a change to the DC multiverse by compressing it into a universe. But something else was also happening. We were seeing an explosion in the independent comic market. We had already seen the rise of independent direct sales comic book stores. They were popping up everywhere. There were more distributors at the time, so there were definitely ways to move comics across the country. The direct sales market, the comic book store, made it possible for a comic that did not carry the code to A, have more mature content, and B, be sold to the public without having to be carried at the newsstand distribution level. So you would go to your comic book store and you would see publishers like Pacific Comics, featuring Jack Kirby's Silver Star and Jack Kirby's Captain Victory. You would see comics like First Comics, carrying titles like Grimjack, and you would see comic companies like Capital. Capital originally published Nexus and The Badger and Whisper. All three of these titles were carried over into First Comics by their creators. Creators were definitely in a stronger position to own their own material, to own their own characters, but the creator market would take an even sharper uptick in the next age to come. Before I get there, let's move through some more highlights of the Copper Age. The Copper Age of comics is where we get, in the independent black and white market, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. This small, low print run book featuring the 4 characters in a story that was a parody, but a respectful parody of the Marvel Universe. We saw the young brave boy who risked his life to save a blind man from being hit by a truck, and the radioactive goo that fell out of that truck spawned the 4 turtles. Now, of course, I'm talking about Matt Murdock and Daredevil, but you see how the internal content of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was somewhat more mature and advanced than what the Saturday morning cartoon would have you believe. There was also Stan Sakai's Usagi Yojimbo. Sergio Aragonés gave us Gru the Wanderer in the pages of Epic magazine, but previously Gru the Wanderer had been published by Pacific Comics. So there were a lot of titles, there were a lot of new genres and new character types that the independent market helped carry, although the independent market also carried a lot of superhero-themed things. The independent market went through what we in the industry called a boom bust. A lot of imitators to the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles came out. Things like the preteen Dirty Jean adolescent Kung Fu Kangaroos, the Cold-Blooded Chameleon Commandos, Hamster Vice, and a great many others. Most of these things were not very good and they didn't last very long, but they led to a rise of the speculator market. Everyone wanted to cash in and get the next big thing before it was actually big. This led to people buying up number ones of these small press independents, speculating on their sharp rise in price, and it also led to the collapse of many of these black and white independent companies as they found themselves unable to sustain in the shifting attention span and interest of that market. However, while a great many independent companies fell by the wayside, certain companies held on strongly. Now, there were companies like Comico, which featured not only the Justice Machine, but Bill Willingham's Elementals, another one of my all-time favorites, and Matt Wagner's Grendel. Matt Wagner's Grendel was an interesting and complex, violent anti-hero character. He was the star of the book, but he was definitely not the hero of the piece. But it was definitely a high point from the black and white Kimiko primer into the color series and beyond. The independent market grew more creators and creators that owned their own material, and they shifted from one company to another. A company might go out of business, or it might hold on, like First Comics with Grimjack, until an internal shift at First Comics brought out the new Classics Illustrated series. First Comics would shrink the rest of its publishing line to almost nothing, putting all of their effort into the new Classics Illustrated. This seemed to be a recurring theme throughout the Copper Age of comics. Now, meanwhile, Marvel Comics has increased their product line, and they have turned some of their single titles into mini franchises. We had already seen multiple Spider-Man titles since the Bronze Age. Not only did we have Amazing Spider-Man, we had Marvel Team Up, we had Peter Parker, the Spectacular Spider-Man. The Copper Age took away Marvel Team Up and gave us instead Web of Spider-Man. Todd McFarlane had come over from DC Comics, doing Infinity Incorporated, to take over the Incredible Hulk, later the Amazing Spider-Man, and later a Spider-Man series where he wrote and drew those stories. So Spider-Man was holding down 4 titles of his own, 5 if you include the reprint material of Marvel Tales. The Uncanny X-Men spawned a second X-Men book. This was the Jim Lee book that many people know of, but along the way, the X-Men had spawned the spin-off title X-Factor, the spin-off title New Mutants. New Mutants would later become X-Force, and this moves us closer to what many people call the Image Age, many people call the Modern Age, many people call the New Dark Age. There are many names for this period, and we are still, believe it or not, new enough into history keeping to not have a full official title.